So good to see everyone. Aaron's here in the base midrash. No cakes this time, but next time maybe we'll have some chulip. Yeah, no. Shmuel said he wasn't sure. But anyway, nice and good to see you. What we're looking at tonight are two questions. I mean, the first part of this year, we're going to look at what the luchot, what was on the luchot, what was written on the luchot in terms of what kind of Hebrew was there, but also hopefully look at it from a broader perspective in terms of what does this also mean, right? Or to think about how does this, the machloket that we see in the Gemara in Sanhedrin and how that plays out in reality, what does that mean to how we perceive the Torah? Also, we'll see in Imshi Meshech Chochmah, which deals with this question about, how does it translate into mashmot, into meaning, so to speak? And it's an important machloket for a number of reasons. And we'll also look at some of the historical artifacts and stuff which you don't see at home, but Aaron here sees on the page over here. And but we'll start from the Gemara in Sanhedrin. Let me just get my pages in order. I'm not used to this at all. So the Gemara says like this. The source in front of you. Mazutra says, right? Betchila nihna Torah l'Yisrael b'ktav ivri v'lashon hakodesh. Right? In the beginning, the Torah was given to Jewish people in Ivri script, Hebrew script, so to speak. Right? Chazra v'nihna lehem b'mei Ezra b'ktav Ashurit. It was given to them again in the days of Ezra in Ashurit script. Ashurit script commonly, although there's a machloket about this point as well, is our script, right? Just so you know the difference. This will become important later. You can look on the sheet, Aaron, as well. In front of you, you can see here, I have the letters here of the different otiot. Aleph, Bet, Gimel, you see on the first sheet there? On the left. And that is ancient Hebrew, and that is what we know. This is Ashurit, and this is Ivri, right? And so when we're talking about the Torah here, not only the Luchot, right? Not only the Luchot, the Aseret Dibrot, right? We need to think about how it looked, right? What it looked like. There's also a question on the form of the actual Luchot, right? But that will leave for another time, perhaps. Right? In the days of Ezra, it came and returned to them in Ashurit script and in Aramaic tongue, right? But we're not talking about this too in depth, right? And then it says, "Birulahen li Yisrael ktav Ashurit v'lashon hakodesh." The Jewish people selected Ashurit and Hebrew. Interestingly, v'nichu lehedyotot ktav Ivrit v'lashon Arami. And they left it for the common people, the ancient Hebrew script and the Aramaic, right? So already now, just at the beginning, you have this very interesting idea, right? That in the beginning, the Torah is given in Ashurit, in Ivrit, right? Which is not our Ivrit. And Ezra came and changed it, right? And that's a very important point to think about. Because normally we think about the Torah in unchanging terms, right? And the very fact that it's raising this as a question is a very interesting point, right? But we'll see the Gemara develops this. Have you learned this Gemara before, Peretz, Nosson?
A while ago, I was in yeshiva. I went through all of Sanhedrin. It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, I did it. I did twice as well. It's also a lot of fun. I moved
It's interesting to see how the judicial system works and how fair it is.
It not only I think the Sanhedrin is also interesting, not only because the judicial system, but also like the structure of control and law is very, very interesting. Okay, and now we come to another interesting point, right? So the Gemara asks, "Man hedyotot," right? Who are these hedyotot? Who are these hedyotot? Right, commoners, as in commoners. Arav Chista Kutai, meaning it's talking about the Samaritans, the Kutim. Right, Ma Ktav Ivrit, Amar Rav Chista Ktav Livona, right, which is the script that we're talking about. Okay, so it's interesting. First of all, why this change, right? Why the need to leave Ktav Ivri for the commoners? Who are the commoners? The Kutim, the Samaritans. So already you start to see that part of what influenced this change, at least according to the Gemara and the change back to Ivrit, was that the Samaritans, this kind of quasi-Jews that lived in the Shomron, used to read the Torah in Ivri script. And we know that, and that's still the case today. Still the case today, right? That their Torah is, it's a different Torah. I mean, it's very similar to ours, but with clear additions and changes to reflect their own beliefs. So whenever it says in our Torah, they talk about it as Shomron, right? For them, they think that we stole the Beit HaMikdash, and the Beit HaMikdash, it's not new, it's not a new idea, right? The Beit HaMikdash should be in Shomron, not in Yerushalayim. That Hashem chose them, essentially. I mean, that's a whole interesting history about where they come from. Maybe it's not really nothing for sure. Maybe in the Tanakh Shir, about where the Shomronim come from, right? According to the Pshat, they're not real Jews, right? And they claim to be Jews, but they do things that are similar to Jews. And there's some areas of Halakha where perhaps they're a bit more reliable than non-Jews. But maybe the more Pshat is that they actually are descendants of the Jews that didn't leave in the exile of the Shomron, right? But that's a whole other.
They have their own research. Recently there was a video online done by Dan Landy, who's one of these campaigns against anti-Semitism.
Yeah.
He wrote from
The Shomronim.
Wrote from Maskut area.
Yeah.
And then they had this guy who's a member of the Samaritan.
Yeah, so they interviewed the Samaritans online.
And talked about how, their traditions and the differences.
Right. And they have traditions. Have you guys ever seen them? Have you been to them in the Shomron? Oh, you should go. They have on Pesach. They do like a kind of a korban Pesach. They shech the lambs there, and their sukkot are very decorative with a lot of flour. Like they make the sukkot out of the produce of the land. Actually, a friend of mine from university now, she just finished her doctorate. She studied the Samaritan text of their Torah to try and determine, this is actually relatively relevant to what we're saying, to try and determine where the scribal changes happened. Meaning, if you bear with me, right, the text of the Samaritan Torah is different, right? I mean, the truth is our Torah text as well, we find different references to in like Qumran, different versions and stuff like that. And you can normally tell, or sometimes, let's say a dalet in our Torah might be changed with the resh, right? For whatever, I can't think of a specific example. And then you'll find in the Greek translation of the Torah that it makes sense that it's with the resh and not a dalet like it's in our Torah. You understand from that the Torah was changed in the Hebrew version in front of the Greek translators. Does that make sense? So what this woman did from Bar Ilan, she went and studied all of these changes in the Samaritan Torah, right? And what she found, interestingly enough, was there were some changes which could be traced to the fact that Ivri letters got confused, and some changes which can be attributed to the fact that Ashuri letters got confused, meaning that the Shomroni Torah that they have today also underwent a process whereby it was part of the Ashuri text. Interesting. Anyway, that's a whole other oilam. Not that, I mean, a little bit relevant, but not that relevant. Okay. So let's read what Rabbi Yossi says, right? Tanya Rabbi Yossi Oimer. Ra'uya Ezra Shetinaten Torah Yadol Yisrael. Ezra was suitable for the Torah to be given by him to the Jewish people. Sorry. Okay. Ilmalei lo kadmu Moshe. If not, Moshe had come before him. And then it says, and then there's a whole comparison there of Ezra. And then it says, the writer continues. Where is it? Why is this? Okay. So it comes down, though, according to Rabbi Yossi, which is an interesting point. Like, what is this doing here? Right? That Moshe could have given the Torah. Ezra could have been the one to give the Torah. Right? That perhaps this change is particularly important. Right? And that's why, we'll see, the Gemara is going to carry on and say, that's why he was zocheh to change the Torah to Ashuri script, because he could have been, it could have been given in his, like through him, but it was given by Moshe. again, highlighting the importance of Ezra in the transmission of the Torah. And that's also obviously tied. My wife, you guys don't come to the women's meeting, Josh, but my wife spoke about Ezra as a real mechadesh in the world of Torah and the world of, all these takanot are designed to support Torah, right? The many takanot we still hold by today are designed as a way to support Torah, and therefore he really allowed it to become a public thing. And we'll see whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, and what the Meshech Chochmah says. Okay, so then it says, Lama nikra Ashurit, right? Why is this script called Ashurit? She'ala imahem Ashur. It came with them from Ashur when they came back from exile. Now that's fascinating. So what does that mean? It means that the text that we have, that our Torah is written in, that you'll see on the screen here, came with them from Ashur. According to the Pshat Gemara here, at least, we'll see what the Mefarshim say, some of them, right? That it came with them from Ashur. The original Torah was not written in this language. The original Torah was written in Ivri, and when they came back from Ashur, it was written in Ashuri. The Ten Commandments, the Seret Dibrot, were written in Ashuri, in Ivri. Perhaps, according to this part of Gemara. Okay. Tanya Rebbe Omer, right? So Rebbe comes and says, "Betchila b'ktav zeh nitna Torah l'Yisrael." In the beginning, the Torah was given to the Jewish people in this script in Ashurit. Kevan shechatu nefach le'en leroetz. Right? Since they sinned, it returned to. Roetz is another way of saying ancient Hebrew, Paleo Hebrew would say in academic speak, right? Kevan shechazru ben hechziru lehem. And when they did tshuva, right, they came back and they wrote in Ashurit, right? So it comes out from this that no, actually Ashurit was the original language of the Luchot. Ashurit was the original language of the Torah, right? And because of the sin, it was resumed it came back to be in ancient Hebrew and then went back in the days of Ezra. Still, it's another interpretation of the importance of Ezra. Ezra was able to lachzir otam b'tshuva, right? It was a strengthening of the Torah, but it wasn't that he came, and this kind of sits much better with us, I think, and the world view that we normally associate ourselves with, I would say, right? That it works better, but it's machloket. Seems to be machloket. Okay. The why is it called Ashurit? Right. So why Lamani Krash Shema Ashurit? Right. If it's Ashurit, it's called Assyrian. So why could it be Assyrian? No. Shemusheret bichtav. Right. Meaning that it's a beautiful way of writing, and therefore it seems to be that that's the other way of reading Lamani Krashurit because it's a beautiful way of writing. Right? Tavze lo nishtana kol ikar. Right? The writing didn't change at all. Right? And then he brings right, the hooks, right, of the poles, right, just as the poles weren't changed, so too the hooks were not changed, right? The letter Vav in our script is like a hook, right, like a hook on the top of a tent pole. Therefore, it must be Vav and the hook. It must be the reason for the letters, and therefore it never changed, never gained back, right? And therefore it also says Af ktavam lo nishtana, right? They bring the midrash from Esther. She wrote according to their script, their language, just as their language didn't change, so too their writing never changed. So according to that tfisa, how does he understand it? It was always written like that, right? It was always written in that language, and it never changed, it never went backwards and forwards. So then, how do you understand it? Right, and more importantly, how do you understand? And we're going to read an example here from the Ramban, right? Now, the Ramban we all know came to Eretz Israel, and actually is very important in the history of Yerushalayim, particularly because when he came to Yerushalayim, there wasn't a minyan in Yerushalayim basically, and he brought Jews from Hebron to establish a minyan in Yerushalayim. Right, the Ramban shul in Yerushalayim isn't actually his shul where it was. It was outside the walls, or like outside where the walls are today, and probably it was his shul, but it moved inside, just like Steen Court is just Manchester Central shul, but it moved from Cedar Hill and stuff like that. Anyway, so one of the things he says at the end of his Perush here, right? Hashem gave me a bracha, and I was zochet to come to Akko. Umatzati sham bidei ziknei haaretz, and I found there in the hands of the elderly of the land, matbea kesef, a coin of silver, mefutach pituchei chotam, with engraving, mitzido ha'echad ke'ein makel shaked, on one side a shaked, a almond branch, umitzido sheni ke'ein tzluchit, and on the other side kind of like a jar. Uvishnei tzdadim saviv, and on both sides around, ktav mefutach ber hetev, right, and engraved writing. Ve'er'u aktav lekutim, and they showed that writing to the kutim who were there, right? Ve'karu miyad, and they read it immediately. Ki hu ktav ivri, because it is ivri writing, asher nishar lekutim, that has remained to the Samaritans, kamoshe muskav Sanhedrin, as written in the Sanhedrin. So you have here a testimony from the Ramban when he gets here, and a book came out a number of years ago. My neighbor was one of the people who put it out. The parts of the Perush of the Ramban that changed when he came to Eretz Yisrael, because he changed parts of his Perush because he saw things in realia, so to speak. And this is, so he says, I found a coin, and you saw, it looked like an ancient coin. I think according to most scholars, this is a coin from the period of Bar Kochva, which is relatively late, right? It's after the Second Temple. But don't we have coins? Yeah, we have, right? Yeah. What they Ivri. But again, it's not like it was an ancient coin from the First Temple period. It was a coin, but okay, but still, you see that he saw the Ivri even in his day, right? And that takes us to just to the first page on with the pictures, just so you know, everything we found in the land of Israel archaeologically until the Second Temple period is written in Ivri. And so here on the first page, you can see it as well, Aaron, and people at home, people watching from home, tuning in live, can see the Shiloh inscription, which is one of those fascinating inscriptions. Has everyone, you've been to Ir David, Aaron? Ir David, right? This was found on the water tunnel of Ir David, right? Describing when they came and they met in the middle of the tunnel. And here's the Hebrew. I'm not going to read it. We don't have so much time. But here you see on the writing. Can you see it? It's Ivri script. You see? I'll try and make it bigger here on the computer. Sorry. Right, but you see here, just as an example, that's a hay over there, and over here, that's like a hay. You get, or that's like a hay as well. You see it there? Like the fourth letter from the right. Anyway, be that as it may, everything you find is like that, right? There's a little a gold leaf parchment kind of thing from the First Temple period found in Gei Ben Hinnom, which has more or less Birkat Kohanim. That's also in Hebrew script like this. All the coins, all the names, everything is in Hebrew script, right? And the Ramban says that, right? So how are we meant to explain that? How are we meant to understand why we have things in if Ashurit, according to one of the Shittot, was something that had existed, right, never changed, then why would we never find anything connected to Ashuri? And we'll see how the Mefarshim deal with this, right? Because we're not the first. The Kutim, right. Yeah, definitely regular Am Yisrael spoke Hebrew. Yes, exactly. So because when it says Hed Yotot, it might, or I don't think it might be just the regular language. Similar way, sort of in history, right. So what I'm saying is the regular people spoke whatever they spoke here, but the gentry spoke French or whatever, maybe in that sense. It's not a different language; it's just a different writing script. But you see, yeah, we'll see. There are some shittot that associate with it. But anyway, just to put it into perspective, we have the following. We have the Gemara that recognizes that there perhaps was a change from Ashuri to Ivri, from Ivri to Ashuri in the days of Ezra in the Second Temple period. According to one shita, it seems to be that that happened, right? It was written in Ivri, the Torah was written in Ivri, the Luchot were written in Ivri, and because of Ezra's special nature, it changed to Ashuri, right? And that's the pshat when it says, why is it called Ashuri? Because it came with them from Assyria. When they came from Assyria, they brought the text with them. The other opinion says, no, the Torah was originally written in Ashurit because it doesn't come from the word Ashur, it comes from the word Me'ushar because it's straight and beautiful. And it's true, everything written in Hebrew was because Am Yisrael sinned, and then it went to a less beautiful kind of writing. And then later on, it was returned in the days of Ezra to Ashuri script. So basically, our Torah is the same Torah that was given at Har Sinai, so to speak, or the Luchot was written in Ashurit, but there was a blip in the middle of a few thousand years because of the sin of Am Yisrael, right? And another shita says, no, it never changed. The Torah, the Luchot were always written in, and it's not only the Torah that that the people in Beit Sheni opened up in Shul to read, right? It's like, what was in the Mikdash, right? What was in the Aron? And according to that, she said, the Aron was always Ashurit. It never changed. It never switched. And so we have the archaeological evidence, and we'll see a few other shita. Yeah.
So just ask, is there ever been any archaeological evidence from after I saw from Ashuri pre sort of the
No.
Golos?
No, I don't think so. But interestingly, just on the orange thing on your page and what you see here, I've brought a section here from the Dead Sea Scrolls, right? Dead Sea Scrolls are Second Temple period. Scrolls written in Hebrew, Aramaic, Greek as well. Interestingly, you find some scrolls in the Dead Sea that are written in Hebrew, our Hebrew, Ashurit, but Shem Hashem is written in Ivrit. Can you see that there's a little arrow pointing to the Shem Hashem, Yud K Vav K, right? Interesting, right? So the question is, why did they write that? Now there are a few options always. The one option is because, like us, right? I don't know. It's probably not a what? Yeah, is it either because they don't want to write Shem Hashem, meaning Ashurit is recognized as Lashon HaKodesh, right? And if they write Yud Kei Vav Kei in Ashurit, then it becomes like Kadosh, and they don't want to do that, so that's why they're writing it in the ancient Hebrew. Or is it the opposite? Is it like, you don't have this problem in Manchester, because everyone here are Ashkenazim, and they talk like Ashkenazim, and they daven like Ashkenazim, but I have this problem in Israel, right? So, I had this problem also growing up. My Hebrew teachers were all Israelis, right? And so I didn't really learn proper Ashkenazis pronunciation when I daven, right? We just daven like Israelis, even in Australia. So, but there is a shita that even I'm always hold by. But when you say Shem Hashem, you should still pronounce Shem Hashem in Ashkenazis, right? So maybe that's part of it, right? That's kind of this idea, right? That the writing it in the ancient Hebrew is an indication of the importance of ancient Hebrew in the eyes of the Qumran people, right? Just like today, many people like to connect to things from the past. They see that as more authentic, and right?
So how would we pass it now? Is this Shem Hashem on here?
No.
Famous or not?
No. Right? We generally don't pass them like that. No. So that's why I put it there, to be honest. We generally don't pass them the Shem Hashem now. So the point is this Qumran manuscript doesn't really. Also they're not frumas like us, right? They're slightly different. I'll talk about them soon if we have time. But what they actually highlighted to me in terms of Yiddishkeit and modern Orthodoxy, right? But still, it doesn't really help solve our question, because you could read it both ways, and scholars are generally divided on this question anyway, right? So let's turn to some sources. A few other interesting sources that kind of don't make the evidence easier. So according to those who say that the Torah was given in Ivrit, right? The Luchot on the Luchot Abrit was written Ivri. What's the problem with that? According to the Midrash, that the letters were miraculously talui ba'avir, right? Which letters were talui ba'avir? according to that, Samech, right, was Talui Ba'avir on the Luchot. You know that Midrash, Aaron? The Midrash that says that on the Luchot, because it was Charut, it was all the way through, the round letters that were completely closed had to be like suspended via miracle. Okay, so the round letters, if you're talking about Ashuri, and that the Gemara talks about Mem and Samech, right? The Mem Sofit and Samech were miraculously suspended. But hang on, how can Mem be suspended if it's written in Ivri? If you look at the alphabet on the sheet, the Mem is not hollow through. Rather, the Ayin is more like our Samech. Right? So how does that Midrash make sense, so to speak? Does that make sense to you, parents? You following?
Yeah, just had to open the door.
What?
I just had to open the door.
But you following what I'm saying, though?
About the Mem not being hollow.
Yeah, but the Samech is. So, interestingly, the Yerushalmi, over here in the source, the second source after the Rambam, Tani Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, from Elazar ben Parata, Shama Mishum ben Elazar ben Amadi, Katab Ashuri Nitna Torah. The Syrian script was the Torah given. Ma Tama Vavei Amudim, Shiu Vavim Shetorah Doim Amudim. Right? The Vav of the Torah is similar to the Vav of the Amudim of the poles. Rabbi Levi says, Man Damar Badatz Nitna, right? Someone who says it was given in ancient Hebrew script, HaTorah Ayin Maaseh Nisim. The Ayin was miraculously suspended. Mandamar Shurinidna Torah Samech Maaseh Nisim. Right? So even in the Yerushalmi, they say that, right? According to the one who says it was given in Ashuri, the Samech was suspended. The one who says it was given in Ivri, the Ayin was suspended. And the Yerushalmi itself recognizes that this is a distinct possibility. Interestingly enough, right? So the question is, what do we do with this, right? What was the Torah given in, or what? I mean, does it sit well with people? I don't know. It sometimes rocks people's world. Sometimes, right? I don't know for the Chevra here, but sometimes you tell this to people and they think you're not Pikoros, right? And you're like, that's the Gemara, right? But it's an important thing because we obviously build a lot into the Torah and also the letters themselves, and we talk about Rabbi Akiva being Doresh Yot. So, how do we understand this? And let's see the Rambam from one of his shutim, from one of his responsa. He says, "Umimasha chayvim atem ledat shezeh aktav רוצה לומר כתב אשורי." Right, the writing is talking about כתב אשורי. הואיל ובו נבנה תורה כמו שנתבאר, because the Torah was given in that כתב. It seems pashut to the Rambam that the Torah was initially given in Ashuri. Right, that's right. Uvo nichtavu luchot habrit, and that is the language of the luchot habrit. Megune lishmesh bo chutz masher bekitvei kodesh, and it shouldn't be used apart from holy letters. Right, and then he goes on and speaks about why it is. ולכן תמצא חרוט תמיד על שקלי הקודש דברים של חול בכתב עברי, ולא תמצא כלל אות אחד מזה בכתב אשורי, לא בכריתת מטבע ולא בכריתת אבן, אלא כל זה בכתב עברי. Right, and so he says this actually helps explain like the archaeological evidence. Why is it that we never find anything written in Ashuri according to the Rambam? Because Ashuri, like you said, right? Ashuri was for the gentry, was for the loved him, right? Was real Ktav HaKodesh, and everything else was written in Hebrew, right? And that's what the Rambam wants to say. And that's that's important shita. And he also the Yavetz comes and says, no one, they didn't dispute what the Luchot were written in. שכתב משה ושם בארון שהוא היה בכתב המאושר. According to him again, it's clear it was written in כתב המאושר. ודאי ולא נשתנה כל עיקר, כי מכתב אלוקים הוא. Right? It definitely wasn't changed because it's writing from Hashem, and therefore it can't be that it was changed. The kol kot v'tag shebo romzim l'sodot elyonim, and every kot, every little shtickle, right, hints at important secrets. And you cannot Chalila say that Am Yisrael received it from Ashur. How can that be? The Torah which we have. Okay, and that again makes a lot of sense, I think, right? The Torah is timeless, and the letters are timeless, and all those things are very, very important. Obviously, come with a lot of important sanctity, right? And let's just read the Ritva here, what he says, right? It's brought in Megillah, because that's where you have the discussion about the Nes. Hebrew was known to the Avot and Bnei Yisrael before Matan Torah. And that is the language that Hashem speaks to his prophets. Right? And because it was so important and so pure, they didn't write in that language, right? Similar to the Rambam's approach, right? That the writing was so special that it was not really used for day to day, right? And then he explains, and when they were exiled to Ashur, v'yadu b'nei Ashur k'tav zeh natlu lahem או שהיה אצלם קודם לכן שנודע להם מספרי הקודש מדבר כתב שלהם או שהיה להם וחמדו אותו ובני ישראל וגלו בו עמהם משם ואילך וזהו שעלה מאשור ובני עזרא ניתן להם לכתוב ספר דבר שער כתובים, right? So basically he comes out and says that when they came back from Ashur, they came back with that language, but it wasn't that it was created from Ashur. That again, similar to the approach of the Rambam. However, that's not the only approach. We have the approach of the Rashba, who seems to have very little issue with this change. And that's important to think about what that means, right? Until now, we've seen the approach, which I would say is the majority approach, to be honest. The majority approach that sees this writing as essential. But the Rashba says here, and says the Navi can't mechadesh anything from now on. And he quotes this kushya of the Tosfot. How could it be that they changed the ktav? And the Tosfot gives his teretz there, and then he says like this: "V'achti lo nichali." That doesn't doesn't work for me, right? Because in Megillah it talks about that the book's being written in any language is okay. Ela mistabra, it seems to be the Lachalif Otiot Otiot Kahi, but the Sanhedrin Zakulim Ktav Ashuri. Seems to me they took the Ktav Ashuri and they changed letter by letter. Right? Chalaf Ktav Ivri, Mutar ve'en ze chidush. He says the most simple explanation for how could it be that Ezra changed the script is that it's not considered a chidush for Ezra to change the script. Right? It's not considered doing anything unique. He changed letter for letter. He took the aleph and wrote the aleph. Bet. But to add other letters to the Torah, that is really considered a chidush, and that, based on the line in. Not sure. I don't know. Well, how does what Aaron said is how does he deal with Rabbi Akiva and Darshan, like the Tarim and all the what? Yeah, the shape of the letters and all those things. What do you do about that? I don't know what he does about that. I will just say though, and this is something which is important that I thought about a lot. That when we talk about the Torah, what are we talking about? When we talk about, and this is connected to ideas like more Hasidic ideas, I guess, but what is the Torah? Is the Torah what we see, right? Or is the Torah something else? Is it deeper than what we have in the Aron Kodesh here? Right? And I think all of us would agree the Torah that we have obviously is the Torah, but at its heart is something much deeper than that. Right? At its heart are values, laws, and all these mystical notions, but I wouldn't just say mystical notions. It's a kind of a spirit, I guess you would say, or it's something more than just in the words of the Hasidim, like that's all like the Malbushim, what we have, right? Our laws, right? Our halachot, our Torah is chitoni, and actually, if you think about it, there are two ways to understand this, but But if the Torah is infinite, or Hashem is infinite, and He gave us the Torah which is infinite, the second you write it down, you already bring it into this world, and therefore it is a little bit removed from what it actually is. Now, right? And so through it you can arrive at the truth. But even as it is, it's not entirely the truth, because it is in this world, so to speak. That's why you might say, no, you're wrong. What's in the Aron is the truth, and you know what I mean? But I think there is an argument said that the Torah has deeper aspects to it that is not just what is written on the page, right? The page is an expression of what's deeper. And the same too here with Rabbi Akiva, you might say that it wasn't that he was darshing out be'emet the letters, right? In the same way we would darken out the letters. The letters were an indication for him about a deeper understanding of the meaning behind it, if that makes sense. And therefore, when Rabbi Akiva comes and darshens out the letters, doesn't really mean what we understand as meaning. He saw the picture and he really darshened out. There was something else he was tapping into. So you could make that argument, perhaps according to the Rashba. Right? So where does this leave us? Where does this leave us with Ezra? What does it mean? Right? What does it mean that Ezra changed the letters? Why would he change the letters? So one, as we saw in the Gemara, one reason to change the letters is to separate us from people who weren't Jewish, or the Kutim who kind of were Jewish, and they come and they say, we're Jews and we speak Hebrew. In fact, we have the ancient Hebrew, right? That you don't even know. And Ezra says, no, Ashur, the Ashuri is the right way to be, to separate out. Now the question is whether that is authentic, so to speak. Actually, that came before and was returning to something, or even in that action, he was taking a step that was necessary, and HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave him that power, because as we saw, he's comparable in many respects to Moshe Rabbeinu, and because of that, he saved the Torah. And then what does that mean? What does that mean about what Ezra was able to do? Right? It means that Ezra perhaps was able not to change the Torah, but to direct it in certain ways, because of the nature of where Am Yisrael was at that time, and because of his level of nevuah. But it changes our approach to how we understand Torah being unchanging, if that makes sense, right? I'm not coming to say Chas v'Shalom the Torah ever changes. I'm just trying to say that it might not be as static as we think, right? Or there might be things that someone like Ezra could have done over history, and we obviously are unable to do that today. But the nature of Torah is not limited to the characters. The nature of Torah is a broader thing that can be changed in some regards, and perhaps the Chitzoniot was changed by the Sanhedrin, and before them by Ezra, perhaps. That's another way of thinking about it. But let's read what the Meshech Chochmah says. He says like this: Masanu be'Ezra sheshina k'tav. We found in Ezra that he changed the writing. והוא כי באמת יאות לפי משפטי התורה שהתורה תהיה מסורה ביד הכהנים ולוויים וזקנים אשר יש בהם כל מכמני השלמות. Right? So he says in truth, according to the Torah should be passed down by the Kohanim and the Levim and the Skenim, right? Because they have like the real perfection. והפרושים היושבים בירושלים, right? And those who are in Yerushalayim, וכל מי שנדבו ליבו להתקרב אל התורה יבוא לירושלים. Anyone that wanted to come close to Torah would come to Yerushalayim. Right? That's the ideal way, perhaps, for the Torah to be passed down. Right? That there's a kind of an elite, and they have Yerushalayim. כמו שמצאנו ברבי אלעזר בן הורקנוס, etc. והיו הישיבות הגדולות אשר נקבעו כל בהם לפי חוכמת בינתם, and there were yeshivot that each person learned in. Right? על קרא תלמד יראת השם. ומפני זה היה התורה כתובה בכתב עברי. And because of this reason, the Torah was written in Ivri. Laman lo yilamed mi she'einu ra'ui. So that someone that wasn't ra'ui wouldn't learn. V'yeh k'zorek even l'markolis, and would be like avodah zarah. V'lo yihav anar bezaken lomar gam anochi orei v'yodei sikrei chochma kamocha. Right? And someone, an inexperienced person, won't come and say, I know the Torah like you, because they couldn't even read the Torah, so to speak. Omnam Ezra Ra'ab is Mano, Ezra saw in his time, Lefi Psu Yisrael Ba'amim, according to the scattered nature of Am Yisrael amongst the people, Vashkach mi'itam mikarei Torah, and people had forgotten the Torah. V'nistam ha'chazon, right, and there was no longer real nevuah. In the same way, Vitlu ha'ro'im, and the prophets no longer saw in the same way. It is better to write it in a language which more people can understand. So Ezra changed the Ktav according to the Meshech Chochmah as a way of actually opening the gates of Torah to the people. Interestingly, right? It's a little bit different than what you saw. And he says, and really in the Second Temple period, Torah was expanded, and many people started learning Torah in different ways. But he says, what happens when that happens in Beit Sheni? We know that Torah expands. More people are learning Torah, but you pay a price, which is people don't learn Torah properly, right? When you don't have only the elite learning, then people don't learn Torah. Right? So even though it caused this split in Beit Sheni, even though there were different sects because there were so many people learning Torah in different ways, still Chazal thought that Ezra was the same level of Moshe to give the Torah in his days, right? Which is an amazing Meshech Chochmah, what he's saying. And it's something which is important to think about, right? We want and I'm just, as we're here in the Beit Midrash, for those looking at home, I'm looking at Steinsaltz, right, or Art Scroll, right? The same arguments used in terms of the Gemara. Why is the Gemara so terse? Why is it so difficult to understand? Because it was made for the elite. It was meant to be learned by really Talmidei Chachamim. So is it okay to translate the Gemara to English, right? And we all know Steinsaltz was putting cherem in the beginning, but I think still using cherem. I mean, it passed away, but I'm saying I don't think that was ever relinquished. Right? But it's an important question educationally that the Meshech Chochmah talks about, but he talks about through the script, right? And he says Ivri was the more special language, and it was written like that, so not everyone could read it. But Ezra came, and he opened the gates of Torah through the language in which it was written. We see this with Ezra in other respects, right? The Targum and everything else he does, reading the Shuk, right? He opened Torah to the masses. Now, with that came a certain price, and it's important to think about in our own day and age. Do we pay that price, right? Like the Rambam says in Mishnah Torah, you can't teach Torah to a Talmid Sheino Hagun, right? Rather, you need to bring him back to Tshuva, and then you can teach Torah, which is a kind of an elitist idea of Torah. And if you don't have that, and you just everyone can go to yeshiva, then necessarily the Torah suffers. But we see, according to Meshech Chochmah, that is the ideal, or that Chazal thought that was an important element, right? Maybe dependent on the generation. That's an important thing that comes out of this, according to Meshech Chochmah. That actually the Torah was changed by Ezra, and it was changed for the better because it allowed more people to come into contact with Torah. Even if we paid a price, that people began to have machloket around Torah, right? Or people began to. Do you want to say something, Peretz?
We talked about the evidence of like stuff which is in Ivrit. So what's the earliest sort of archaeological or evidence that we've got something which is in Ashuri or Ashuris?
Qumran, Second Temple period.
And that's a mixture.
No, I mean much of Qumran is written in Ashurit. It's just in some scrolls you've got Shem Hashem in Ivrit.
Right, okay.
But
so
some scrolls you also have Shem Hashem in Ashurit. This is an example of like the combining of the scrolls.
And what's the sort of the earliest Sefer Torah that we have, which is, or the oldest Sefer Torah, which is?
Yeah, not quite that. Yeah, medieval.
Right. Okay.
Like Aram Sova, like it's not even complete these days.
So what would the opinion say about the tagging of, if it was done in a Vrit, did that also have tagging when it was in the Sefer Torah?
No, because the letters are different, so it wouldn't perhaps have the same. And even if it did have tagim, they would be different tagim.
Right.
That's also what Aaron asked, right? How can we understand the darshan of the tagim if Rabbi Akiva, if the Rashba says, yeah, it was changed, it's okay that it was changed. He just changed letter for letter, and therefore it doesn't really seem to be a problem. Right? So I said perhaps the depth of Torah is not connected to the actual tagim. The tagim is only representative of something deeper. If that makes sense. But again, I'm not going to, this kind of shoes called great debate, I'm not going to answer the question, but I think it creates a lot of, like the Meshech Chochmah is an interesting approach, right? That this change in Torah was necessary in order to open up Torah, and that itself asked the question.
Similar to
Yes.
You to write down Torah about how beforehand it was like,
Yes, so Aaron says it's not similar to Rabbi Yehuda Nasi who writes down the Torah Sheba'al Peh. Yes, exactly. Right? Does that change the mahut of the Torah or not? Right? When we write down Torah Sheba'al Peh, and that's an important. It is very similar to that question. Right? But I think no, I'm not to take away. I'm saying these questions are very fundamental to Judaism, right? And they say a lot about movements in our modern world in terms of Judaism. Like for instance, Hasidut, at least in when it started, was very much geared towards opening the gates of Torah, or not even the gates of Torah, but the gate, opening Judaism to not just the elite, right? And they came in many respects to make that argument that many people didn't have any kesher to Torah because Torah was only for the briskas and the elites, and they came to make that argument. And it's something that plays out in many aspects, and I think also in our own day and age, right? You have to think about, in when you're educating your children, do we want Torah to be open to everyone, or do we want it to be for the elite? There's always a balance, because you always pay a price both ways. But more importantly, getting back to the actual question, right? How do we feel with thinking about that the Luchot actually had Hebrew writing and not Ivri writing and not Ashuri writing, right? And what does that teach us about the possibilities when you have someone like Ezra to change things and to redirect things, and what does that mean? Again, obviously we can't change things today, right? But it just changes your perspective about how Torah works.
You would argue that you need someone as level to do that.
Exactly. You would need.
People felt maybe Rabbi Steinsaltz was not on the level.
Right. People maybe felt Rabbi Steinsaltz wasn't on the level to do what he did. That's what Aaron just said. Right. Exactly. Right. Again, I don't know if it's us to translate Gemara, but that's the point, right? But it's an interesting thing which comes about as part of this argument. Now, I was meant to talk about Qumran and what it's talking about modern Orthodoxy, but it's a bit late in the piece. So perhaps maybe we'll leave another time. Next week we're not going to have. I can talk a lot about Qumran and modern Orthodoxy, and also Qumran and the Israeli elections, but and Am Yisrael in general and the situation we're in. Maybe we'll leave it for another time because it's getting late. Next week, we're not going to have shiur because Yael Ziegler is going to be talking. I don't know if you've seen the advert from Mizrahi and a few other shuls connected to Megillat Ruth. Tomorrow evening, in Mitzvah Hashem, we're going to look at the Tshuva and also look at some inyanim that are connected to Megillat Ruth as well in preparation for Shavuot. So on that note, does anyone else want to say anything or have questions?
Yeah. Tzuba is. Did you say Tzuba? Are we doing Tzuba tomorrow night?
Yeah.
Yeah, 8:30. Yeah.
Yeah, regular time, 8:30. Yeah.
Okay, just check.
Okay, good to see everyone. Thank you for joining.
Thank you. Bye bye.
Okay.
Thank
See
you,
guys. Bye.
Shkoyach.